Welcome to Beyond Belief. Freddie Silva with us, best-selling author, leading researcher of ancient civilizations, restricted history, sacred sites, and their interaction with massive consciousness. Freddie, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on again.
Yes, sir. Now, what exactly is restricted sites?
Oh, the things that people don't want to talk about that make academics very uncomfortable.
Oh, really?
Yes. So we have a story, which is what all the boys and the girls get together around the table and say, this is how history really is. And then you forget about all the other evidence that doesn't quite fit the paradigm, and then you make everybody else into pseudoscientists.
Why don't they go public with this?
It's a good question, isn't it? Well, there's a lack of funding that goes around colleges. There's only so many colleges that are available for hiring these people. So many places you can get published. So if you rock the boat, you're out. You don't get published, you don't get funding, and that's the end of your career.
Yep.
So I kind of feel for them in that way. But at the same time, the whole point of being a scientist is to discover the unknown and keep discovering the unknown and keep going where the evidence takes you, not restrict the evidence to follow a certain theory. Otherwise, we'll get nowhere.
Let's talk about some ancient history first for a moment.
Well, twist my arm.
What exactly were the gods of the ancient times?
Not a guy with a white beard sitting on a throne. We in the Western
With
world...
clouds all around him, right?
Exactly. They were basically an understanding of nature. The gods were nature spirits. So grass is a god, a chair is a god, a stone is a god. So anything that lives, breathes, moves, was created in the universe has its own god or its own essence, if you like. So anyone that basically was able to understand this essence and look at the glue that holds these objects together was deemed to be as a god. So you became, for example, a person who understands how water works. You became the water god. So it's not because you're better than anybody else, it's just that you're able to perceive nature on a very subtle level, and that kind of elevates you as a person within yourself, but not within the tribe. But eventually we elevated these people to become, like some social status, if you like.
Is that what the Greeks did? Because they
Pretty
had gods
much.
for everything, right?
Well, they kind of mythologized everything because by their time, they'd lost the plot. They had no idea what they really were doing. For them, the gods were mysterious forces that were mythological. But the Egyptians before them were actually admonishing them. And they were saying, well, you Greeks are too young. Wait till you're in our shoes. We've been around for over 36,000 years. And this is how things are. You're beginning to lack the understanding of what things really are. These are not just myths, they're actually eyewitness accounts. So there was a gap between reality and fiction by the time the Greeks get hold of the story. By the time the Romans get hold of the story, they have no idea where anything is. They're all supposed to be just make-believe spirits. But to the Egyptians and any ancient culture, they were real people and they had possessed extraordinary gifts.
And this was going on all around the planet in different regions. Easter Island, they had their gods. They had their gods everywhere, didn't they?
Absolutely. And if you go back 12,000 years, the picture is dramatically different. Not only do we have a different planet, we have a different sea level, which is exposing much more landmass. And we have all of these different cultures which talk about these gods suddenly arriving on massive boats, double-hull canoes, for example, out of nowhere. And they would stay behind, they would replenish their resources, and then they would tell the local shaman and the local wisdom keepers a bit more of the wisdom that they knew. It's as though there was two parallel civilizations working parallel to each other. You had hunter-gatherers like us,
right,
and then you had the gods, the people who understood the laws of nature and could manipulate nature in incredible ways. They were master astronomers, seafarers. They knew about the mysteries of life, and they would teach the hunter-gatherers another bit of understanding to help them elevate themselves so that one day they could be like the gods as well.
Were the gods humans, Freddie, or were they supernatural?
Well, the thing that I've found over the years, looking at all the indigenous cultures, that they decreed that these people were very much like us, but not quite like us. In fact, the word, they were human-like, but not quite human, is the phrase I always find. So they were very tall. The Egyptians give us natural dimension in one of the temples. They were 5 cubits tall. And regardless of which cube you're using, because there were several, that would be between 8 to about 10 feet tall. And that goes with the skeletons that we find in many of the giants' graves around the world.
Giants?
Giant people. But there were other giants as well. We'll go there some other time. So they were very, very, very tall people. And they were often elongated skull. And they were red-headed and green-eyed and blonde and blue-eyed and always light-skinned.
Were they ETs?
They didn't mention this. They kept saying they were always associated with Orion. That always comes up all around the world,
Right.
whether you're in Easter Island, New Zealand,
The star system.
the Sahara, the Orion system, and specifically the belt stars. And they said that at one time, these people had the ability to go from our level of reality to the belt stars of Orion. And from there, it would be like Grand Central Station. You go anywhere you want. And whether it was done physically or out of body as an experience where you can actually project yourself to be somewhere else, that now is a matter of conjecture because these stories are no longer there. But the thing I found in my research is that they were very much like us, just had the ability to manipulate the laws of nature as we know them to get from A to B. They had a foot in both worlds, if you like. But they certainly weren't afraid of them. So they were very comfortable with who they were, which makes me believe they were very much like us, just a little bit different.
What about the gods of New Zealand? What's unusual about them?
Oh, it's unusual because no one actually knows about them. Go back about 12,000 years. So now we have not just Easter Island and New Zealand, but we also have many other islands which are now gone. They've disappeared.
Where'd they go?
This is the big story. They were going to Easter Island every year. They were meeting a tribe called the Waitaha. Hardly anyone's known about these people. And the oral tradition just got published recently, and I was very privileged to hear about this, published it in my new book. And they were saying that every year, these gods called the Urukeu, you would show up on Easter Island from a great land in the east called Kainga Nui Nui, which I would take to be either a missing land or South America, one or the other.
Huh.
And these gods would go to Easter Island, and then they would appear in a place called the birthplace of the gods. And I thought, oh, now we're getting somewhere. And it turns out that the birthplace of the gods is this location on the South Island of New Zealand. It's still there. It's a natural landscape temple full of very unusual features, all of which have been shaped by human hands. And this has been in the oral tradition of the Waitaha for over 12,000 years. They just published this information.
And where do these gods go?
Well, apparently, when they were done with New Zealand, they would go back to this land somewhere in South America. But in between their peregrinations around the Pacific, they got caught in the big flood. Not many of them survived. The ones that did were able to survive and go back to New Zealand. And then 2 generations later, they show up in Easter Island, which back then were described as an archipelago. Not one island, several of them. So there was still a lot of landmass around. And they're in charge of remapping the Pacific because the whole landmass had completely changed. And there was a title that was given to one of their leaders. She was called the Net of the World, which is kind of interesting because the same description is given of the surviving gods who were in Egypt at the same time. So there's a big overlap here between people who are navigating the Pacific and they were also in Egypt and South America at the same time. And the big connection with South America is that whenever the gods used to go from the birthplace of the gods in New Zealand back to South America, they were said to take 2 totem birds with them. And one was called Titi and one was called Kaka. And together you get Titi Kaka. Exactly. So now we know that somewhere before the flood of 12,000 years ago, there was a civilization on Lake Titicaca. And of course, we know that as the city of Tiwanaku and all the area around it.
Does Atlantis come up at all in these ancient discussions?
It does, and that's more linked to the Mayan culture, or should I say the pre-Mayan culture. So if you go back again to the same time period, everything's been destroyed, not many people survived. And in 9,600 BC, and this is actually written down in one of the sacred books of the Maya, a group of gods suddenly arrives in what today is called the Yucatan. And they were called the Its. And they navigated from stepping stone to stepping stone, the remains of what used to be a big landmass in the Atlantic, from a place called Atl. They were really into big names back then.
Right, they are.
Exactly. And the Aztec eventually called it Atitlan, or as we know it today, Atlantis.
Atlantis.
And they said that basically they were called the people of the serpent, and it has nothing to do with being reptilians. It's the fact that anyone who harnessed the laws of nature was deemed to be in control of the serpent energy, because the serpents move like this, as does energy.
There's got to be some truth to this.
Absolutely, because at the same moment, on the other side of the Atlantic, there's a group of people called the Ophiuza who land in Portugal, in fact, in the location where I was born, which is really weird, and they were called the people of the serpent as well at the same time. And they escaped the sinking landmass in the Atlantic, and at the same time, in Egypt, they show up as the followers of Horus. They're also people of the serpent. So we're talking about the same group of people going out and repopulating the world after everything had been completely changed.
Are they the Viracocha?
They are also related to Viracocha. And the one thing that connects all of these people together is that the nickname that they had were Shining Ones. So in South America,
Shining Ones.
the Viracocha shows up and he has a group of 7 architects with him. One of them is a woman who happens to be his wife as well, which is very convenient. And they were called the Hai Wapanti. You got to learn all these things.
How do you know these names?
I asked the local people what they mean in their local language, and I said, does that mean something? They said, yeah, it means the shining people. I went, my God, are you telling me that Viracocha landed here in South America with a group of shining people? I said, yes, which is where we get the name Tiwanaku from, the city that they built. And at the same time in Egypt, the gods there were called the Shining Ones, the followers of Horus. So we have 2 different parts of the world. 2 different groups of gods, one charismatic leader who leads a group of 7 people, also called by the same nickname. So we see that all of these people belong to the same group of gods. So it wasn't just that there were gods here, gods there and everywhere. It was the fact that they all belong to the same family, but they were worldwide.
That's fascinating.
And that's the piece that has been missing all along.
That's it. On the Gaia program, Ancient Advanced Technology, David Childress talks about the strange gods of Peru and Bolivia.
So here's your standard keystone cuts here at Tiwanaku. You see the T cuts here, and there's one on the corresponding side. You see more here. You always have 2 corresponding keystone cuts on each side. And in fact, this is exactly what we see at Ollantaytambo. This is also a pre-Inca kind of construction. We know that Tiwanaku was built at least 1,000 years, if not more, before the Incas existed. In many ways, these keystone cuts are proof that the Incas were not building Ollantaytambo or the other buildings that we've seen around Cusco. This is the famous Gate of the Sun here at Tiwanaku. You can see how this megalithic piece of andesite has been split by an earthquake. In fact, this gate isn't really from this part of Tiwanaku. This gate is from the Pumapunku section of Tiwanaku, which is several kilometers over that way. If you look up here, you can see the sun god Viracocha. He's holding 2 staffs on either side. These may have been jade scepters of authority. Notice too that his has tears coming down his cheeks. He seems to be crying. These are sometimes called the tears of the sun. Gold is often called the tears of the sun here in South America. This is something of an indication that Tiwanaku was a massive metallurgical plant processing ores and creating gold, silver, and copper. Some people say too that Viracocha is crying for the Red Land, for Atlantis, the land that's been destroyed and no longer exists.
So
his shirt used to be the same color as his jeans before he washed it. You know that?
yeah, exactly. You notice these things. Like David did a great job explaining what that was.
Yeah.
But my question to you, Freddie, is why? Why all those inscriptions, and what's it all mean?
Oh, that's a masterpiece. That
Is it?
doorway.
Classic?
It's an incredible calendar. It's, for example, the headdress. It's actually Peshakamak. It's not Viracocha, it's Peshakamak. He's the creator of the universe. He's holding 2 serpents, the electricity and magnetism, the forces that create the universe. And if you just look at the numerical values of the headdress, that gives you the metonic cycle, which is the cycle of the moon, relative to the calendar of the sun.
How do they know this?
There's a couple of mathematicians that have done some work on this, and I don't remember their names off the top of my head, but they looked at all the little vultures and the little symbols on that portal, and they found that the angles at which their beaks are actually put together, which are very unusual angles, they are the degree of latitude at which that portal stands. And also they match the eclipse cycles. They match the paths of Venus and other planets. The whole thing is a big calendrical masterpiece. It even gives you the sunspot cycles. So someone who is a master astronomer, a real lover of the sky, completely carved this on a piece of andesite. And it was already there before the flood, because the local stories and
Without
the Aymara,
computers, for crying
it's a
out loud.
massive computer, and it's like the language itself. Aymara, which is also the name of the local language, it was deemed to be, it's based on the same algebraic format that a computer can understand. It's a design language. It's not an organic language like you and I understand English, and English has grown out of Roman and Celtic and the Germanic languages and Indo-Aryan. That takes thousands of years. Aymara just shows up completely developed, and the syntax can be understood by a computer, which can then translate Aymara into any other root language. And this is the result of a mathematician and a computer designer that worked this out. So it's in an invented language. It shows up out of nowhere. And the Aymara always said, and still do to this very day, that yes, we came from a sunken continent called Lapukije. And you know it by another name, Mul, which of course is Lemuria.
Right.
And they still teach this around in the schools to children around Lake Titicaca today. And they said, yeah, we came here, we were the helpers of the gods. We're not the gods, we're the helpers that came from that land. They helped us survive the catastrophe of the flood, and we ended up in South America. And they still talk about it today.
Were these ETs?
And they still say the same thing. They were very human-like, but not human. They were much taller than us, they were different, but they were kind of like us. So they weren't afraid of them, they were very comfortable with who they were.
Do they talk about them coming down or anything like that?
No, they just moved across the ocean with these incredible ships. They got around the Pacific as easy as you and I go shopping for groceries in a car. The ships, and in fact, a lot of the designs are still in Samoa and Tonga today. They're massive catamarans, and they can hold 200 people in one go, and they do go.
Where are these ships now?
They're still making them in Tonga, in smaller sizes.
Where are the ancient ones, though?
Gone, completely disappeared.
Sunk?
Sunk, and also because they're made of balsa and different reeds, they
apart.
just fall apart. They go back into the soil. That's why there's hardly any archaeological evidence to back it up. But a lot of it's under the ocean now. There's whole islands that even only 200 years ago were in the Pacific. They've disappeared.
Freddie, what does this tell you about the ancient civilizations of the past?
The fact that we have a recurring situation, any ancient culture, unlike the Western culture today, thinks in the round, that things always come and go. And the idea is to learn from our predecessors so we don't make the same mistakes of the past. That's why they keep giving us the knowledge of their experience, so that when we approach cataclysms, I mean, right now we're in the middle of one, if you can call it that.
Yeah.
But they're saying, but even NASA now admits that in the next 10 years, we're facing a lot of stuff coming out of the sky. And they're big chunks headed this way, and they're getting a little bit concerned about this.
And a little too close.
And a little too close in the next 10 years. And it's the same place where the ancestors were. The gods also had the same thing about the sky. They're obsessed with the sky. Now, why would you be that obsessed unless you wanted to keep track of deep space objects? You've built a civilization. You don't want it to go away. But at the same time, they were very fatalistic. They recognize the fact that things come and go. The idea is that people survive, and the survivors must have the information and the knowledge to rebuild, not from scratch, but where they left off. And that's why they kept putting the information on big stones, because the big stones survive, no matter what happens.
Were there certain areas around this planet that were more advanced than others at those times, like Egypt? How far advanced was Egypt from other areas?
There were pockets of civilization, and there was one book which is called the Building Text. It's written all across the Temple of Edfu. At least the Greeks found at least half of it.
Right.
And they were saying that there's one incredible story there, and it's pretty concurrent with the beginning of the Younger Dryas, the Ice Age. So that was about 12,800 BC. It tells about how the gods, these shining ones, the followers of Horus, show up in Egypt to build the primordial mounds, and I quote, upon which we would build the historic temples. And as far as I'm aware, there are 9 mounds. And they were saying that our land had been partially sunk by a catastrophe, which is exactly what was happening with the first ice age.
Right.
Sea levels rose, comets came down. They were looking for a new homeland in which to rebuild their former world. And they were there at a time about 10,600 BC. And it's kind of interesting because archaeology has just found evidence that along the Nile, in the exact area we're talking about, there is a sudden dramatic civilization. We suddenly discovered animal husbandry and agriculture It's an anomaly. We shouldn't have been discovering agriculture at that point. And it ties in exactly with the arrival of these half-human, half-divine gods, as they call themselves. So these are places like Karnak and also the Giza pyramids. And of course, if you follow the trajectory of that story and follow the information that Robert Bauval and Adrian Gilbert did with the pyramids and the dating to 10,400 BC, you can also see how some of the architecture follows in that megalithic style up and down the Nile. In fact, if you look 13 layers below the Temple of Edfu, there's your original temple. But you've got to go down on the side of the temple to find that. So these things have been built and rebuilt and rebuilt and rebuilt. So they were already losing their homeland. They knew that stuff was coming out of the sky. And they had barely 1,000 years to get their act together before the next catastrophe struck. And that was the end of the Ice Age, the big flood.
Where does Central America fit into this scheme of development?
Same people as there were in Egypt, same people that were also in New Zealand and the Far East.
Same people?
The same group of people, just called by different names. So here we have Quetzalcoatl, we have Kukulkan, and we have one that never gets talked about, which is Itzamna.
Well, let's take a look about Quetzalcoatl.
Is Quetzalcoatl the missing link in the mystery of Aztlan? And could his symbol be universal in the lineage of all the different civilizations of ancient America and possibly ancient Sumer? Author Anton Parks believes Quetzalcoatl could have an ancient link to the Sumerian god Enki. Based on his research, he discovered that Enki left Sumer and resided in Egypt. When he came to Egypt, he became Osiris. According to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, Osiris was then killed by Set and resurrected by his wife Isis as the son Horus. Horus then revenges his father's death.
Sumérien et également égyptien. Horus profite de la venue de Vénus dans le ciel pour livrer bataille. Ça, c'est un point
In some Sumerian texts, but also in Egyptian ones, Horus takes advantage of the fact that Venus appears in the sky to start the fight. That is interesting because the link between Horus and Venus is quite clear. Horus manages to defeat Set in an epic battle. When Horus finally defeats Set, he completely disappears from Egyptian texts. I think that I found his trace in America, near Mexico, under the name Quetzalcoatl. I think that he wanted to leave the Sumerian and Egyptian gods' heavy atmosphere to create his own community where he will be called Quetzalcoatl. We also find traces of him a little further down, such as in Peru, under the name Viracocha. I believe when he flees to America, he isolates himself, he transforms into this wise character, has a whole community around him, and he calls himself Quetzalcoatl.
Among the Aztecs, whose beliefs are the best documented in many historical sources, Quetzalcoatl was related to gods of the wind, of the planet Venus, of the dawn, and of crafts and knowledge.
Freddie, I'm just amazed at the ancient knowledge of all of this. I mean, that's an amazing story.
Yeah, he's on the right track. And now he's also following the same trajectory. But there are two things you need to know about the ancient wisdom. One is an eyewitness story, and the other one is a metaphoric spiritual understanding.
Right.
And sometimes the two overlap.
They blend. Exactly.
And I've also thinking about the same trajectory where the same person might have been going all around the world. And I'm thinking that would be very hard to do because you literally have to move across continents, literally in the blink of an eye, to be in different locations doing exactly the same thing at the same time. So where my story differs slightly is that these people were all part of the same group of gods, but they were all related. And that's where the overlap is. So Osiris is its own individual person. Enki is an individual person, but they belong to the same group of people.
Why did they seem to travel around a lot?
I don't know, because they seem to have a sort of a concern that they wanted to sort of keep their memory alive with the survivors of these catastrophes.
They did a good job with that.
They certainly did, because without them, we wouldn't be here. And that's the one thing that I always sort of decry about people bashing the Anunnaki, for example. They're always the bad people. Actually, it was a small group of people who were the problem people. It's like in any culture, you have good lawyers and bad lawyers, you know. They're not all bad.
Exactly.
And I always point out that these Lords of Anu, which was essentially the group name that they had, Without them, we would not have agriculture, we wouldn't have animal husbandry, we wouldn't have the accoutrements of civilization we have today. And when you read the original story that was written down by a guy called Emed Ur-Anu, who becomes known as Enoch, so the Hebrews changed the name, Emed Ur-Anu was one of their kind. And you look at the story just before the flood and you see the heartache that they had. They said, you know, we've lost contact and control of these small group of watchers who were the craftspeople of the lords of Anu. They went down and mated with human women. They taught them things that hunter-gatherers really shouldn't know at this stage in life, because you have to have a certain amount of development in order to take up arms and do this and that or the other. And they said, rein them in. We went and asked the watchers to bring in the renegade watchers. So there was a small group of them that defied orders. They began to teach humans things that they should know at that stage of life. And they came back to them and said, we've lost control. We don't have enough manpower to bring in the renegade watchers, and worse, their offspring, the Nephilah, which means the children of Orion.
The Nephilim?
They're the really tall people, the real giants that go around eating people and doing some really horrible things.
That's what the Bible makes reference to.
Exactly. Right? And they said, there's nothing we can do. Humans will not survive. The whole planet will be a planet of red-haired covered giant people in no time. So they said, we're going to manufacture the flood, and there will be survivors. Gods will stay behind to teach the surviving humans how to restart civilizations. We will teach them how to take care of themselves. So we owe them a big favor. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this show.
And how far back did this happen?
This would have been 9,700 BC, and there's geological evidence that now shows in the Greenland ice cores that there was a massive pulverization of the Earth. Something horrible happened. Things struck the Earth, and every culture around the world,
was affected.
180 flood myths around the world talk about burning mountains coming out of the sky, hitting the Earth in all the exact places in the ocean.
A meteorite, an asteroid?
Exactly, all meteorites. Yeah. And there was one case in Nepal where they said that the water reached the Himalaya. Now you think that's 3 miles up. 3 miles high.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Well, I found a ballistics report in Los Alamos where they were looking at exactly the same story. And they said, would it be possible for an object, let's say 1/2 mile wide, coming in at the right angle with the right kinetic energy in the right deep pocket of a trench off Peru, for example, what would happen if we reproduced that in the laboratory?
Tsunami time.
And they did.
Yeah.
The object hits the water, and the plume that goes up is 3 miles high, which means that when it comes back down, it's going to recreate the same height when it hits a landmass. So this is now actually put down in scientific terms that you can actually reproduce a 3 mile high tsunami with a 1/2 mile wide
And
object.
how long do you think that event would last? From the initial hit of the asteroid, the shock wave, to the tsunami, to coming back?
It depends on the point of origin and also the depth of the water. But it would have taken a matter of, say, a day for these tsunamis to go around. Even a seismic wave, say, off Indonesia would take half a day to get to New Zealand.
Massive obliteration.
Exactly. Right? And it was everywhere, absolutely everywhere. I have stories from Australia, from different Aboriginal groups that talk about the waves coming from. And they live in different parts of the country. So the people in the north of Australia would talk about this wall of darkness coming towards them that they thought was a cloud, a black cloud. And they thought, oh, that's not a cloud, that's a big wall of water. And the people in the south part of Australia were saying, yeah, there's a big wave coming from the north. Well, if they're living in different parts of the country and they're seeing the same point of origin of the travel of the water, they can't be making that story up.
Exactly.
So that's why I like listening to the old people, because they were there. They remember these things and they teach people orally, and the story continues. And like the Waitaha of New Zealand, they've now just published it because they said, these things are upon us. And it's, luck favors the prepared, so we should prepare.
What do you think of Hopi prophecy, Freddie?
Oh, another wonderful eyewitness account. In fact, if you go back to the
and it matches some of these other things.
It matches everything. Right? Yeah. Frank Waters, who wrote one of the best books on the Hopi traditions, I love the book. It talks about the different points and the descriptions of what these worlds look like, and they match what we now know about the 3 Ice Age events.
Right.
And in one of them, the last one, the Hopi, who back then were called the Hizat Sinom, we know them better as the Anasazi. And they were
located where?
They were located in a place in the middle of the Pacific called Kashkara.
Okay.
There's going to be a test on this, George.
Will I pass?
And spelling as well. And the landmass is called Kashkara. We don't know if that's the same as Mul or Lemuria. We don't know. But they're saying that there was a group of people called the Ant people, the red ant people. One of them was called Anu Sinom. So there's the Anunnaki again.
Here we are.
Anu Sinom, who helps them go from island to island and eventually drops them into safety in the middle of the southwest of America where they are today. So they're very helpful people. They never describe the Anu as being horrible bastards. They're always helpful. They're always making sure that people are okay, giving them the right accoutrements, and once they're done, they disappear back into the unknown.
Tell us about Göbekli Tepe. What do we know?
How long have you got?
10
Göbekli
minutes.
Tepe is fascinating for one very good reason, and that is the way it's aligned to a town which is only 20 kilometers away. Everybody keeps looking at the back of it to a hill, okay, to look at what's in the sky.
It's in modern-day Turkey, right?
This is in modern-day Turkey, but back then it was in what is today Armenia. So you've got to learn at the original where this all comes from. Göbekli Tepe is not the original name. The original name is Portasar. And so now you have to learn your Armenian. So luckily I have some friends from that part of the world, and I said, what does it mean? And I said, well, port is easy. That's an umbilical cord, okay?
Right.
What does Asar mean? And they said, we don't know. It doesn't exist in Armenian. And I said, I know it does not exist in Armenian because it's Egyptian. And they said, what? What does it mean? It says, that's the original name of Osiris. Osiris is a Greek name. Asar is the original name. So you have Göbekli Tepe is the umbilical cord of Osiris. And I'm going, why is it an umbilical cord of Osiris, and why is it so connected with Osiris,
Amazing.
who's one of the original gods? So at that moment, it's like someone just downloads the image into my head of the pyramids, and there's a connection between the pyramids and Göbekli Tepe, and that's, 800 miles? And I'm thinking, what is the connection? And it's just one of those moments where you just thank God that someone's looking after you. And I began to look at the pyramids, and I thought, let's take a line between the corner of the small pyramid and draw it right through the big pyramid. And where does it go? It ends up in Göbekli Tepe. There's your umbilical cord. So the two sides, and Giza is supposed to be the dwelling place of Osiris, and that line goes straight through the two pyramids all the way to Göbekli Tepe, which is also the umbilical cord of Osiris. And the thing that connects them together is the fact that they were also called the Watchers. They were called the Shining Ones, followers of Horus, who essentially is the nickname for the Watchers. And their group happened to be living in a town just down the road from Göbekli Tepe called Har Anu, which means the meeting place of the Anu. And that was in 8000 BC. So I suspect that the Anu were also involved in the building, or at least one of the buildings, of Göbekli Tepe, because there's so many, there's over 60 buildings. That we're never going to dig the whole thing up in our lifetime.
We've got a program on Gaia called Ancient Civilizations with author Andrew Collins talking about the strange things of Göbekli Tepe.
Andrew Collins points out that once the humans left the area of Göbekli Tepe, they spread out all over the world with the same system of civilization.
After the closure of Göbekli Tepe, and these settlements began to spread outwards like waves and created what's known as the Neolithic Revolution, taking with them new ideas in agriculture, animal domestication, metallurgy, the production of alcohol in the form of wine and beer, stone tool technologies. These ideas gradually moved southwards as well as westwards, eastwards, and presumably northwards as well, and end up going through the area of the Levant, which today is the countries of Palestine and Israel, and reach Egypt as early as 8,500 BC. And that here, within sight of the Great Pyramid, or where it would later be built, settlements arose, and that amongst these were highly sophisticated stone tool technologies which are found identical at Göbekli Tepe.
Why does this cradle of civilization seem to be so important?
Because we have so much information left over from it. We're lucky enough to have all the clay tablets for the Mesopotamians and the Babylonians that were buried, in 30 feet of mud, just like the Egyptian stuff was buried in so much mud that was able to be preserved. So we tend to use that as a focal point of civilization, and I think it was actually everywhere. There were hotspots everywhere around the globe. It wasn't just a place where something happened and then it disseminated from that spot. I think that there were nucleus points all around the world that acted as hotspots of information and culture and civilization, and they sweated out the information around there. The trick is to find out how they're all connected, because the only way you're going to find that out is talking to the local people about this and about their stories. And the more you travel the world, as I do, the more you realize that it wasn't one point of civilization. There are at least 8 points of civilization, and they're all interconnected, which kind of almost lines up with the sort of the known places where the gods used to live. So this is now being brought out to the fore. So it wasn't just Atlantis, it wasn't just Lemuria, it was Cascara, there was the birthplace of the gods. These things are starting to build up into a much more global story. I think things are much, much older than we believe.
What do you think of the work of Zecharia Sitchin, Freddie, where he talks about the Anunnaki, the Anu, coming down here from another planet?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to look at this as sort of a personal point of view as well. I mean, I like Sitchin's work because without him, I wouldn't be here. I mean, I read that stuff when I was getting laid off, and I had a few months of unemployment to read all his books, and I found them riveting.
And they were
riveting. But there are errors in the work. I mean, like all of us, no one's perfect. There were mistranslations. So I guess you have to take to a point where there's real research and then there's personal opinion. So I take a lot of what is done and I say, okay, I totally agree with that because we can back that up. Some of it you put in that box of I don't know. For example, if you ask any of the ancient tribes around the world about, do you think these people came from another star system? They said, well, they were here on Earth. We don't think they came from somewhere else, but they were of the stars and they're always connected with the belt stars of Orion. And then the story just disappears. So I think he's kind of correct on some level, but we can't really prove it.
He's close. You've done a lot of work in Cook Islands.
Yes.
Where is that?
Middle of nowhere. You have to go on Google Earth somewhere in the middle of Polynesia and you go, what's that? And you close in on Google Earth and you go, oh, there's something there.
The Cook Islands.
The Cook Islands. And then you have to go to the furthermost island called Tuanaki Island. And there's a place there which is a little hut. I'm trying to be very journalistic. There's a small hut where lives the oldest wisdom keeper of the Cook Islands. And when I was writing the last book, somehow someone put him together with me because I had a missing piece. I couldn't piece all the gods around the world except for Polynesia. And he was very gracious and he said, let me tell you what we know about our oral history. That in about 3000 BC, there was a rising sea level, and there was. The Persian Gulf eventually gets flooded, and it displaced a lot of people. And he says, there's a group of people that showed up here, and they've been coming here for a long time, called the Tupanaki. And I said, that sounds very familiar. And he says, well, you know them by another name, the Anunnaki.
Anunnaki, yeah.
And I went, the Anunnaki were in the Cook. Yes, they've been here for a long time. And in fact,
and they were the Red Ant people too, right?
And they were also associated with Red Ant people. And they said, if you go to Easter Island, there's a mound there called Anu Hanunaku, and there is the Anu Hanunaku, which is the platform named after them. But I said, that's not what I'm looking into. I'm looking at the big flood. What can you tell me about the big flood? And they said, well, we can tell you.
Is this the flood of Moses?
The big flood,
Noah.
9,700 BC. Yeah. And he said, yeah, back then, these people, the Anunnaki, were living on a circular island in the Indian Ocean. And my jaw was just dropping. I said, where is it? I said, well, you won't find it. Because the earth was submerged, 140 feet sea level went up.
Atlantis.
Lands came down, lands went up. It's now in the general area of where exists the Arabian Peninsula, because that came out of the ocean, and their island went down. Because we've been looking for the place of the Anunnaki all along. They call it Garsag or Karsag. We've never really identified it. And finally, this wonderful person who, I think he must be 60 by now, he confides in me that, yes, we have the oral tradition of the Anunnaki living on a circular island called Tepitaka, where now somewhere in the region of the Arabian Peninsula. So now we have an actual record of where the Anunnaki used to live.
That's fascinating.
It is incredible. I never would have expected that to come out of the blue.
What are you working on next, Freddie? What's next for you?
Trying to get on a plane with some beverages for free.
That's what you want, huh?
I'm working on something that kind of is a bit different, but then it always is. I'm looking at the prehistory of Scotland and the Western Isles of Scotland because I found so much of the culture, the megalithic culture of Scotland in Sardinia. And those two never go together. So I just did a documentary on it, and usually you do a documentary after the book. I put the cart before the horse.
Right.
But it's got me thinking, because I'm looking at the original story of the people who settled there, which turns out to be the gods of Ireland, the Tuatha De Danann, who are none other than the Tuatha De Danann, who are none other than the Anunnaki. So within 5,000 years of moving from the Middle East and the area around Mount Ararat, they went through the Danube River, which bears their name,
Right.
through Denmark, which bears their name, through the Nordic regions, and of course the physiognomy of the people of the Nordic regions bears their physical structure, very tall, blonde, light-skinned, just as they were described by the ancient people. And I believe they populated Orkney, which is ice-free at the time, and they moved south towards Ireland, and they became the gods of Ireland around 4000 BC. So I'm following that trajectory of what happened to the Anunnaki, because they did become the bloodline of Europe after many thousands of years.
Freddie, thanks for being on Beyond Belief.
My pleasure.
Fascinating, ancient history. But to think of just how many gods we had on this planet a long time ago and how it has affected us today, truly remarkable. I'm George Noory, and thanks for watching Beyond Belief.